Hello everybody and welcome back to The Pale Thread. I'm Kat Martin and I'm very happy that you're here with me today. So today we're going to go through a lot of background on the victim of our case today. I don't know if you're in the same situation as I am, but the victim today, I knew his face. I knew him from a bunch of places, but I never knew his name. So today you'll get the chance to know all about Philip Edward Hartman and the tragic ending of his life. Like I said, I'm going to dig deep into his past because I think it plays a big role into how his life ended. Fun fact, this is my second time filming this, so I'll try and be more concise this time, but didn't have enough space on my computer yesterday, so it kind of... Philip Edward Hartman, better known as Phil Hartman, was born on September 24th, 1948. He is Canadian. He is from Brantford, Ontario. He was the middle child of a huge family. They had 8 kids, so even back then, that was pretty big. When he was 10, his family moved to the US. They moved to Maine first, then they moved to Connecticut, and then they went on to move to the west coast of the US, California more precisely. There isn't a ton known about his childhood. One thing we know is that he's from a family that didn't necessarily provide him with the affection that he needed, so he would get it elsewhere. So you won't be surprised to learn that he was class clown. Everybody in high school loved him, and this is a theme throughout his entire life. Everybody loved Phil. His first try at college was at Santa Monica City College. He did drop out in 1969 to follow some rock bands and be a roadie. So that's kind of interesting. Some sources say that he already had started doing some art for these groups. In 1970, he had met his first wife. Her name was Gretchen Lewis. That didn't last very long. It ended in 1972, and that's when he went back to college as well. His second try at college and success at college was at California State University. This time around, he studied graphic arts and he was extremely successful at it. Like I said, he did some covers for some bands. I'll put some around me just so that you have a reference. You'll see he's very varied in his style, and I love that about him. He could have made a lifelong career out of it, but he always had that itch for performing arts. It's at that time that he shortened his name to not only Phil, but he also removed the last N on his name, so now his name was Phil Hartman. Hartman had always liked playing around with voices and impressions, and people knew him for that. He practiced a lot, and when he was 27, he took a comedy class from the very popular improv group called The Groundlings. If you don't know what the Groundlings are, who the Groundlings are, it's a rotating group of incredibly talented people. It usually launches people that have talent and aspirations in Hollywood. To name a few, Lisa Kudrow, which is one of my personal favorites, and I think there's Jimmy Fallon as well. I'll put a list here because wow, it is extensive. He would only take night classes though, and his graphic arts revenue would actually kind of fund his passion for acting and impressions and improv. Actually, one night where he was at the Groundlings as a spectator, he saw an opening, I guess, in one of the acts that was going on, and he jumped on the scene and played with the Groundlings, which, I mean, that's what improv is. They rolled with it, and apparently it was amazing. So I thought that shows so much balls, and his talent was like no other. I saw an audition tape, and you can easily find it on YouTube. His audition for SNL that he did later on in life is insane. Like, it's insane, the talent that oozes out of this man's pores. He has been referred to as a Robin Williams kind of talent, and I completely agree. When he was 27, he went on a TV game show called The Dating Game, and he actually won. The girl picked him, but she never showed at the actual date afterwards, so that was kind of funny. I think she missed out, personally, but hey. His first big screen chance that he got was in an Australian movie in 1978. It was called Stunt Rock, Everybody on set loved working with him. No matter where he went, no matter what job he got, he is not difficult, he is charming, he is talented, and people love him. In 1979, so a year after that, he actually joined the Groundlings as an official member of the group, and he very quickly became one of the star people in the group. And I do think that that's what launched his career. He stood out very, very quickly. It's also in the Groundlings group that he befriended Paul Reubens. So you might not know Paul Reubens' name, depending on how old you are, but if you know the character Pee Wee Herman, you know Paul Reubens. So he's the one who developed, with the help of Phil, they developed the character Pee Wee Herman, and they started as a stage act, and very quickly HBO picked it up, so it became a TV show where Phil had a character in there called Captain Carl. He would also do cameos as Captain Carl in movies like Cheech and Chong, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which is a movie that I've never seen but I've heard of. That was all fun and dandy, and he was happy to be working, but that wasn't enough for him. He wanted more parts. He wanted to be more active as an actor, as an improv pro. At 36, he felt like he wasn't making it, and he thought about quitting because of the lack of work that he was signing. He also wasn't working with Reubens anymore. They had a creative disagreement and just stopped collaborating. Shortly after that phase, he met his second wife, Lisa Strain. That also didn't last very long. She said something that many people would say about Phil Hartman. So although he was a very, very social person and he would light up any room that he would walk into, I know that's typical to say about someone that's been killed, but when he went back home, what we refer to as our social battery now, that term didn't really exist back then, and he would become quite recluse once he would get back home. And for a partner, that can be very difficult. So she said, quote, "He would disappear emotionally. He'd be in his own world. That passivity made you crazy." And that's kind of something that all of his exes mention. So in 85, Strain and Hartman divorced. In that same year, in 1985, he started booking a lot of commercials and voiceover acting. And then in 86, he got his huge break. He was taken on as a regular on SNL. And that's what I was referring to when I was talking about his audition tape. His audition tape was insane. I've never seen anything so impressive. So he started at SNL in 86, and when someone asked him why he was so keen on doing SNL, he said, quote, "I wanted to do SNL because I wanted to get the exposure that would give me box office credibility so I can write movies for myself." So although he did want this to be more of a stepping stone, it ended up being a big part of his career. He stayed until 94, so from 86 to 94. So it's a pretty big tenure at SNL. So as he stayed on to SNL, he did over 70 characters. He was known mostly for his imitations. He was known for imitating Bill Clinton, Charlton Heston, even Barbara Bush, and like Ronald Reagan. He also got a very cute nickname, I find. So his friends on SNL called him Glue. And when someone asked why he was called Glue, they said that, quote, "He kind of held the show together." And not only scene-wise or character-wise, also when he was working with his colleagues, people loved the fact that he was supportive, he was low maintenance, and he was a true professional and just a good person. If you ask me, I feel like it's because he got his break later on in life. And I think that as you age, you learn a ton of things and you learn gratitude too. So for him, he had worked so hard to get there. And as talented as he was, it took him until he was older in life to actually get a chance. So I think he was a good person naturally, but I think he also had kind of this attitude of gratitude. So the same year he started at SNL, he got set up on a blind date with a model / aspiring actress called Bryn Omdahl. She was a tall, beautiful, charismatic, blonde bombshell. And his friends at some point said one of the reasons why he was so enamored with Bryn very quickly is that Phil never went for the babes. He never got the chicks, and for him, Bryn was his dream girl, and he felt very fortunate that she was interested in him. And Bryn said that also on the first date that they had instant chemistry, and it was evident. It wasn't forced. The conversation flowed. So although she had all those qualities, she was far from perfect. Bryn had a past of jealousy. She was insecure. She was frustrated with the fact that she was not yet successful. She started being impressed by the fact that Phil was successful, and she also thought maybe he would help her in her career, but she grew very frustrated. And she was naturally, from a young age, a very envious person. So being married to someone who was at the peak of their career and she wasn't getting anywhere, it was very rough on her. She struggled with addiction, cocaine, and alcohol addiction. Their 10 years that they were together, she was in and out of rehab. She did get, I think, almost 10 years of soberness. It was a struggle. She was known to be verbally abusive and physically abusive with Phil. No reports about their kids. They did have 2 kids. No reports of her being violent towards the kids. So similar to what Lisa Strain had said, she would say how he would get very in his own head when he would get home. He would get very silent, very distant. And Phil said once, quote, "I go into my cave and she throws grenades to get me out," which paints quite the picture. There's also a lot of people who would say that Bryn had confessed that in her mind, the only way she would get his attention was by throwing fits, making scenes, and that's when he would actually wake up and give her attention. Like I said, they had 2 children during their marriage. They had a boy first, Sean Edward Hartman, in 1989, and then a girl called Bergen Hartman in 92. And there's not a lot said regarding their talents as parents or anything about the kids, really, honest. When Bryn gave birth to their second child, so Lisa called Phil to congratulate him and also say, if you need anything, just let me know and I'll help out. And that didn't make Bryn happy. So she wrote a 4-letter page basically threatening Lisa if she ever contacted them again that she would claw her eyes out. And then Lisa was kind of worried about that, not for herself, but for her ex-husband. So she called Phil and she asked him, "Do you know who you're married to?" And he said, you should have seen the one that she wanted to send initially. This one was a tame version. And that worried her quite a bit, understandably. There's also records of Bryn being very jealous of Jane Hooks, who was a colleague from SNL. Her and Phil were very close friends, but nothing but friends. There was a letter found that was never sent to Jane Hooks where Bryn would express how jealous and angry she was and just being very threatening towards Jane Hooks. So like I said, throughout the years, Phil wasn't really able to help Bryn out in her career. I think that she was looking to do some comedy things, and reportedly he didn't find her super funny. So he was having a hard time placing her in certain things. I think he got her a couple gigs, but really she felt more and more frustrated. When they moved into a small apartment when he was doing SNL, she was stuck at home, not working, being basically a single mother, because if you don't know, working on SNL is extremely demanding. The hours are crazy. So she basically felt like she was a single mother, which probably really didn't help her frustration. In 91, Hartman started planning his departure from SNL. He ended up staying until 94, but in 91, he already started thinking about moving on to something else. Because he was doing more voiceover acting, maybe he wanted to go more towards that. In 91, he got the job on The Simpsons. It was supposed to be a one-off, but like everywhere that he would go, people loved him so much, whether it be the audience or his colleagues, they loved him so much that they wanted him back for longer. During his time in The Simpsons, he did 52 episodes total, which is very cool. when you're supposed to be a one-off. So in 95, he was cast as Bill McNeil on News Radio. And I don't know if you guys remember that show. I remembered knowing Phil from something, and throughout the years, I would have flashes in my head of a show I watched when I was a kid, and I couldn't remember what that show was. And I'll put a picture here so you can see the faces of everybody that was on that show. And it's all people that you kind of know their faces, but you don't really necessarily know their names. There's Andy Dick that everybody knows, but I mean, even then, I wouldn't be surprised if someone didn't know Andy Dick's name, you know? So in News Radio, he was supposed to portray a loud, arrogant, yet free-spirited character, and man, did he play that well. I remember thinking he was so annoying, but now knowing that that's just not his personality, that's just acting, wow, was he good at it. As Bryn's frustration throughout the years was growing, and Phil reportedly didn't want his relationship to end with Bryn, so he was thinking about retiring. So he had about a 3-year plan ahead of him, and they took many vacations in the Catalina Islands, and I think that long term, that's kind of where he wanted to be. He wanted to stop working, and he wanted to spend all his time with his wife, and maybe then that would soothe her anger and they would be successful in their marriage. But sadly, because we are here, we know that that is not how things ended. On the evening of May 27th, 1998, Bryn met up with a friend. She was a producer and writer from Third Rock from the Sun. God, I love that show. She met with her name was Christine Zander. They went to an Italian restaurant where Phil and Bryn used to go all the time. It was actually one of the first times that she was there without Phil. They met there. The name is called, the restaurant is called Buca di Beppo. And it was in their own neighborhood of Encino, California. Later on, Zander said that Bryn was in a good mood. She seemed fine. Although she was supposed to be sober, she did kind of slowly sip on 2 Cosmos during the evening, but it didn't trigger her. She didn't nothing stood out. After their evening, she then drove back to their 1.4 million residence at 5065 Encino Avenue. And when she got back, I saw 2 different reports. So I believe that she may have gone home and then back out again to her friend's home. So her friend's name was Ron Douglas, and I do think he was an ex of hers. But she went to Ron's home, continued drinking. I do believe there was some cocaine consumption there. And then she went back home. And when Phil realized that she was intoxicated, allegedly, he said, "I'm not doing this again. It's going to be either you're sober and we're together, or we're not." And he went to sleep. Their kids were already asleep, and she waited some time. Phil went to bed, and it went around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. She picked up her Smith & Wesson Model 15 .38 caliber blue steel revolver. She walked into their bedroom where he was sleeping, and she shot Phil Hartman 3 times. First shot went through the head, in the middle of the eyebrows. One went in his neck, and the third shot went through his forearm and into his chest. So he was basically sleeping like this, and the bullet went through his forearm and into his chest. The first bullet killed him, so he did not feel anything, and the 2 extra bullets were just completely unnecessary. So was the first one. So not too late after, she went back to Ron Douglas's house and immediately confessed to killing her husband. Ron thought that she was just on a binge and she was delusional and she was delirious. So he waited until she kind of sobered up, and around 6 a.m. they drove back to their home. He was scared for her, so he took his own car, she took her own car, and they drove back to the Hartman residence. He walked in and went into the bedroom and found the body of Phil Hartman deceased. He called the police, and police showed up at 6:20 a.m. He was taken out, as well as the 2 kids. And Bryn went back into the home and locked herself in the bedroom with her deceased husband. She picked up a different gun, a Charter Arms undercover blue steel .38 caliber revolver, put it to her mouth, and killed herself. I believe that the time of death was 6/21. You may wonder why she had access to so many guns. She and Phil, I believe, had started purchasing guns when the fans and the stalkers started piling up, and it was for protection, basically. Who is Bryn Hartman? Why did she feel the need to do what she did? What brought her to this step in her life? Bryn Hartman was actually born Vicky Omdahl, and then Vicky Joe, and then Brendan, and then finally ended up being called Bryn. She was born in Minnesota in April 58. She was one of 4 kids. There's not a lot said about her in her childhood. What I've read and what I've heard is that, the jealousy side of her and the envious side of her and the needing attention was there when she was a kid already. So basically with Phil, it was just aggravating circumstances. Her high school principal said, quote, "She's just another student, an ordinary lady," end quote. And what he's saying by that is that she didn't stand out as anyone that was violent or troubled or had issues. So for him, he was dumbfounded that someone that was so ordinary would become problematic, severely problematic. But also, if someone said that about me in high school, I would have, ouch. Anyways, she dropped out of high school and got married very young. That was in May 1977 that she got married. She was trying to be a model, but she would only get very small gigs locally in Minnesota. So she decided to move to California to pursue her dreams of acting, modeling more seriously. So that meant moving to California, so kind of divorcing her husband who didn't want to follow. Again, when she moved to California, only able to book very small deals, and then she had a very small role in Third Rock from the Sun and small modeling jobs, but really nothing substantial. There's one thing that kind of comes up every time that you read about this case is to do the intro of SNL, and you see Phil Hartman that's sitting at a kind of a booth at a restaurant, and they asked her to sit with him, but her back is to the camera, and the whole time during the filming of that little part of the intro, she always turned to show her face, and every time the director would be like, just don't turn around, the focus is on Phil, it's not on you. And she told her friend that she was incredibly frustrated with this, and I get it, but also you don't choose. You don't choose a scene. You don't choose how a scene goes when you're an extra, even if you're the wife of the guy that you're sitting across from. She was described as a good mother, a very good, devoted mother, but she was volatile, insecure, jealous, with anger issues, and that kind of transpired throughout this whole story. You can feel that it's palpable, and there's a part of me that feels for her, because I do think that there's a lot of mental health issues in there. I'm not saying that what she did is okay by any means, because I don't believe it is. I think it's a horrible, selfish thing that she did. But I know that recently she had gotten some prescriptions from her son's doctor to get antidepressants. And this was a very new thing for her. I think it had been a couple of months. And I do think that the mix of that evening, her resentment, cocaine, alcohol, and the antidepressant, I do think that culminated in something that was horrible, but I do think that there was a lot of mental health issues in her case, and it accounts for something. Her behavior throughout the years, her selfishness throughout the years, I do think that there's a lot that can be put on the back of mental health. It's not an excuse, but it might be somewhat of an explanation. The moment that the news hit LA, everybody that kind of was close to Phil met at John Lovett's house. They spoke about stories they had with Phil. I tried to keep it in his image, so keep it funny, keep it light, and honor their very good friend. Lovitz went on to replace Hartman in the show news radio. He didn't do it as a score. I got myself a contract. He saw it more as he was honoring his friend. There was a bit of a scandal after everything happened. Jon Lovitz openly said that he believed that the person responsible for both of the deaths was Andy Dick, which is one of their colleagues on news radio. And he believed that because he believed that he got Bryn into drugs again. Andy Dick, from what I read, said that he had no clue that she was an addict, and they had seemed to kind of bury the hatchet with the years, but it kind of came back up years later, and it culminated to a physical altercation between Lovitz and Dick. Jon actually slammed Andy's face into a bar. I don't know how accurate that information is, but I read it somewhere. Once everything was settled, their kids were now in Bryn's sister's custody, and still, well, not still today because they're older, but they took care of the kids for the rest of their teenage years. Hartman was not only named the 87th greatest icon of all time by Entertainment Weekly, but years after his death, he also received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and he is still remembered as someone that was exceptional. Don Allmeyer, an NBC exec, actually said, quote, "Hartman was blessed with a tremendous gift for creating characters that made people laugh. Everyone who had the pleasure of working with Phil knows that he was a man of tremendous warmth, true professional, and a loyal friend." So you, my friends, have been with me for quite a bit now. I thank you for spending this time with me. I thank you for giving time to Phil Hartman and not letting his legacy die. I hope you will see me in the next video, and I hope to interact with you in the comments below. Stay curious and stay safe. Bye.